Good evening, everybody. Welcome in to an of the Lions Grid. My name is Kevin Marhini. Happy to have you joining us here today. Of course, just as a reminder, we are coming to you live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, and Twitter. Apologies for not being on for a pregame show yesterday. Coming out of the bye week, you like to think that everyone's getting healthy. I was unfortunately I was coughing quite a bit yesterday, so doing a show was kind of out of the question. Thankfully for some NyQuil Severe, I'm severe strength. I'm doing much better. I think I can make it through the show today. So definitely wanted to get on and talk a little bit about the Lions' Week 7 loss to the Cowboys. They lose that game 24-6, a game played in Dallas. And I think there's quite a bit to talk about. I think you can tell in the title. We have SOL, same old Lions, and really we'll touch on that a little bit because I think really it sort of goes beyond that, and let's just kind of dive into it. So, uh, one thing as we start to look at what the Lions are dealing with, I can see my father there on YouTube commenting about Matt Ryan being benched for the rest of the season with the Colts. The Lions have issues. The Lions, we knew they were going to have issues coming into this team. You know, uh, Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes were very clear that this would be a multi-year process to get this team ready to the point where they were ready to compete consistently for the playoffs. This is year two. I know I'm guilty of it. I thought a lot of the changes that they made in the offseason positioned them to make a big swing from being one of the worst teams into the NFL or in the NFL to being a team that could potentially challenge for a playoff spot. A team like the New York Giants or the New York Jets, who both went from last place to currently sitting atop their divisions. I thought that potentially the Lions had done enough in the offseason, and I sort of fell for it, right? I think Lions fans in particular, when we talk about the same old Lions, we talk about them falling apart. There being changes made in the offseason, whether it be a whole new regime being brought in or free agents being added, and thinking that the team is going to suddenly instantly become a whole lot better than they were the previous season, and it doesn't happen, right? So on the one hand, you have the same old Lions where, regardless of it seems like who's in control of the organization, what regime is running it, they sort of struggle to find a way to turn this team into a consistent playoff contender. But you also have Lions fans, so it should be SOLF too, who constantly fall for that same trick of, hey, they've added some pieces. I think they've addressed some of the issues they had last year. They're going to be a whole lot better this year without waiting to see any of it happen on the field. You get really excited. You think, hey, they brought in Aiden Hutchinson, who everyone thought was going to be was a fantastic pick with the second pick. We're happy that the Jacksonville Jaguars did not draft him and that he fell to us with that second pick. He did get 1.5 sacks yesterday, so he added to that total. There's still a long road to go. Right now, if I had to look at it, Aiden Hutchinson, he certainly looks like a guy who can be a contributor on that defensive line, but he isn't like that, Joey Bosa, Nick Bosa, TJ Watt, JJ Watt type guy who's on the edge, Khalil Mack, who is just that bad dude who can sort of take over games. He's a guy who, as part of a unit, I could see being very successful because you saw once Kaminsky came back off injury, this was his first game back at that defensive line. He was able to see sacks again. The last time they played together was in Washington, and since then, they've both been struggling with injuries. So when they're both on the field, I think Hutchinson can be productive, but I think he's a guy who's going to require players around him on that defensive line to be successful, which arguably is not what you want when you're taking somebody at number 2 overall. When you're taking them with a second pick in the draft, you want a guy who can come in and be a Khalil Mack, a JJ Watt, a Nick or Joey Bosa, some guy who can come in and sort of set the pace on their own and rushing the corner from the corner. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem at least 6 games into his young career that Aiden Hutchinson is going to be that guy. He might get things figured out and it might be able to show a little bit of that. But so far, here in week 7, he definitely seems like he could be a good player with the right unit, and certainly could help out this team. But it seems like he is going to require, it's going to be more than just his individual contribution that's going to make him successful. for the team. Um, you know, so that's where we're with Hutchinson. Um, and I've also heard a lot of people calling for Dan Campbell's head and Brad Holmes. Thinking that wanting to sort of get them out of here and start with, I guess, another rebuild process, or get other people in here who can pick up the reins where they have them, I guess, and sort of steer course correct or something like that. Like I said, they were very upfront when they took the control of this team and said that it would take multiple years to get to the point where they could consistently compete for the playoffs. As Joe points out on YouTube there, I think a big issue that they need to address is that QB, and with Jared Goff. Now, the first 4 games of this season, Jared Goff was definitely serviceable. He looked like he could easily be, when the offense was humming, be that quarterback that Detroit needed, and like they might not have to go invest resources to go get him. The offensive line is one of the best offensive lines in the NFL, even against the Dallas Cowboys, who are one of the best teams at rushing the passer. They did a fantastic job of giving Goff an open pocket and time to make decisions. But in this game, he made poor decisions. This week and last week against the Patriots, it's like a switch went off, and he has just been awful. He hasn't even been serviceable in these last 2 games, and you've seen the offense struggle. They went from being one of the top offenses in the league to, in the last 2 weeks they've scored 6 points, and they've turned the ball over a ton. And I think a lot of that does start with Jared Goff, because that offensive line is still doing their job. They are giving him the time and protection that he needs to be successful. It's his decision making and some of the carelessness with the rest of the team as well with the ball that is really hurting this offense that looked to be the source of strength on the team. So obviously the defense hasn't gotten a ton better. The source of strength on the team has now faltered and is looking like a completely different unit out there. It makes this seem like it's going to be a very long rest of the season for the Detroit Lions. And as my dad points out, yeah, they lost Amon Ross St. Brown did get knocked out of that game. I think had he been out there, had DeAndre Swift been able to go after the bye week, I think he would have been another big piece that could have helped out in the passing game from the backfield. I do think they are struggling because of that wide receiver depth. They've had a lot of injuries. DJ Chark hasn't quite played at the level they were hoping. I think they were led on Sunday by Khalif Raymond, and unfortunately for the Lions, I don't think Khalif Raymond really makes the rosters in a lot of other teams in the NFL. So the fact that that is your top guy, uh, we've seen TJ Hawkinson step up in other games. He only had 4 receptions for 48 yards in this game against the Cowboys. I think if you're the defense going up against the Lions, when you're looking at who you need to take away with the way the receiver room looks right now, it's Hawkinson. You game plan to take him out of there and force the rest of the team to beat you. And unfortunately, like what the Packers are experiencing in Green Bay, I don't think they have the tools to be effective. So, I'm not going to put it all on Goff, but Goff has made some questionable decisions that haven't helped. Of course, the wide receiver injuries are something that factors into it. So I do though the way. So Goff has a long way to go. We're 6 games into the season. We still have plenty more to play. If he can sort of flip that switch and go back to the Jared Goff we saw in the first 4 weeks, and he can prove that he can consistently play that like that, and these last 2 weeks have been sort of the inconsistent flukes, then I think maybe we head into next season and can feel okay about Jared Goff. But if he continues to struggle and play the way he has the last 2 weeks against the Patriots and now here against the Cowboys, I think the Lions are going to be forced at that point to make some investments in bringing in some QB talent. And I guess the interesting thing could be, with Matt Ryan getting benched for the Colts, obviously I think in an ideal situation, right, the Lions would get a young QB in the draft or something like that they could have and potentially be their franchise quarterback for several years. But it's going to be interesting to see. Lamar Jackson hasn't signed with the Ravens yet. You got Matt Ryan on seemingly in timeout with the Colts. Potentially could the Lions look next year to bring in a veteran quarterback as opposed to going for that trying to find that franchise mode QB? It could be interesting. And as my dad points out, they do need a lot of talent on defense. Um, like I said, I think Adrian Hutchinson can be a great guy on a unit, but he is the really him and Kaminsky right now are the only two guys on that defensive line. They need at least two more NFL starting caliber players up there for I think them to really be effective. And then their linebacking core. Nothing against Rodrigo, he's still chugging along there. But when your best linebacker is a sixth round pick, I think that just speaks to the level of the talent on the team. So you want to bring some more talented individuals in. And I got to give props to Jeff Okuda. We'd been talking earlier this year about him being a potential candidate for comeback player of the year. He played a very nice game here against the Cowboys. Sort of rebounded because he did have a rough go against DK Metcalf and the Seahawks. But DK Metcalf is kind of he is not your average receiver, even when you're talking about NFL receivers. He is a tall, fast guy who is just he's that unicorn. He shouldn't exist, right? He's just a lethal combination of both. So I don't necessarily blame Akuda for struggling to cover him because he is just a very unique talent. But it was nice to see him sort of step up here against the Cowboys. And it does lead to some encouragement because I think one of the things that has been not a SOL, same old Lions type deal is the development of players. We've seen players who have been brought in by previous regimes, administrations go on and find success at other teams. A lot of former Lions players like to go over to the Patriots, and you see them sort of have a career renaissance. But it's nice to see Jeff Okuda being a player who was taken by a previous administration, see him sort of turn things around and have success here underneath this new coaching staff. Now, I said I wasn't ready to give up on Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell. Definitely Brad Holmes, I think I feel more comfortable about. Dan Campbell is of the two of them is the one that I feel less excited about. Just because Dan Campbell is definitely he's a guy who can motivate the team, but we haven't really seen. He's not known to be a play caller. He's not an offensive or defensive guru. He isn't a guy who has all these learned secrets and things like that that he can rely on. So, what we've seen from him as a head coach, while the players certainly respond to him and certainly are willing to play for him, we're not seeing we're kind of ideally we'd have a guy who could offer the best of both worlds, right? Like an Andy Reid. Andy Reid is one of those coaches who can not only motivate his team and knows when to push and pull back on with his guys, but he's a very talented offensive mind. He can do both. He fits both of those skill sets. And that's a rare thing to find, right? I think a lot of the coaches that have been in places for a long time at different NFL teams are those guys who can sort of do both those things. Not only be someone who can motivate the team, but is also good at play calling, whether that be on the offensive or defensive side of the ball. And so, it's no surprise that the Lions, have sort of struggled to find one of those because those coaches are rare. And when they are, those sort of coaches are found in the NFL, they do tend to stick with their teams for quite some time. And they don't like to relinquish control of them. So, if you get rid of Dan Campbell, I'm not really sure who is like, I don't have a candidate where I'm like, let's dump Dan Campbell and bring this guy in because I think he is that dude who could be not only that motivator for the team, but also I like his take on offense or I like his take on defense. I don't have that candidate, so I'm not going to sit here and call for his head because I really don't know who they should bring in. Um, but I think really I'm not doom and gloom on them because when I was doing my season projections this year, I didn't have them winning this game against the Cowboys. This was a game I had them losing. Certainly, I think the way sort of circumstances had worked out heading into Week 7, with Dak Prescott coming off of an injury, taking the helm for the first time in a few weeks. Certainly, there was an opportunity for the Lions to get a win in Dallas, but it was a game, again, played in Dallas with the Cowboys. I had them losing that even in my most optimistic projections for the season. So I'm not real discouraged by them dropping this game to the Cowboys. I think again, it is disappointing that the offense continued to struggle after how successful they had been earlier in the season. But at this point, the question becomes for Lions fans, and it's a sort of it's a crappy question to have is it time for a race to the bottom, right? Like at 1-5, we're 7 weeks into the season. Is the best the Lions can hope for potentially getting the 1, 2, 3 pick in the NFL draft next year? And is that really what we have to look forward to? Um, Unfortunately, with the way the state of the offense has been, the way the defense has played, I think we are going to be competing for that number one pick. You know, you did see the Panthers come out and beat Tampa Bay, which is helpful to us in that regard. Um, at this point, it's kind of a bummer, right? Because we do have a really good offensive line. The Packers are having an off season. They are just looking horrible. I think the Lions will actually, at this rate, I think they may finish below the Packers, but I wouldn't necessarily be surprised given the fact that the Packers found a way to lose to the Commanders if the Lions do beat them. I mean, it wouldn't be the craziest thing in the world. I will say though, that you look at the way that Pollard and Elliott beat up on the Lions defense. Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon for the Packers are also a very nasty 1-2 punch running the ball. So, unfortunately, the Packers may not be able to throw the ball, but if the Lions let the Packers run all over them like they did the Cowboys in their 2 games this season, the Packers could easily win both of those games as well. I think really you are in a race to the bottom, unfortunately. I'm not sure how many more wins this season I would project the Lions to have. Um, they do have, of course, 2 games against the Bears. Uh, but they do play the Panthers as well. So there will be a head to head between those 2 teams. But you look at some of these other teams that we have coming up. We have the Dolphins next. Then we have the Packers, the Bears, the Giants, the Bills, Jacksonville, the Vikings for the second time, the Jets, the Panthers. And then we finish out against the Bears and the Packers again for the second time each. I'm not sure how many of those remaining games are wins. Um, I think they can certainly be competitive in a few of those games. But right now, at the beginning of the season, I would have picked the Giants and the Jets. I would have picked the Lions in those games. The way those 2 teams are playing, I think that you got to make them the favorites. The Bears are a horrible offense. Um, so potentially you could pick up a win or 2 against the Bears. But outside of the Bears, maybe that game against Carolina, I don't see the Lions adding many more wins this season. So, yeah, I mean, I guess the good news is you get a high draft pick, but hopefully they can find somebody on the defensive side of the ball again to really round it out to help Aiden Hutchinson because I think for him to be as successful as he can be in the NFL moving forward, he's gonna need a unit around him. I don't see him again being that Khalil Mack, JJ Watt type individual player where he is solo making the difference on the defense. He needs sort of a well-rounded unit around him so that they have to choose who they're blocking, and then he can take advantage of that at times. So, the good news is I guess it'll help us with our draft position, but the bad news is that means this is going to be, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 weeks of some disheartening football to watch. Now, hopefully, the offense flips that switch back, and at least it can be competitive and entertaining to watch. Because even though they weren't winning in those, they did get the one win against the Commanders, but even though they weren't necessarily winning at the beginning of the season, at least it was fun to watch, right? It was fun to see Swift and Amon-Ra St. Brown and everyone have those games and Jared Goff throw for 400 yards. At least it kept things interesting. But unfortunately, what we're seeing lately is a product both on the field for both the offense and defense that just makes it hard to watch. And when you have 11 weeks of football to go, watching your sort of team die in front of you slowly, painfully, is not a great thing. And it's just it feels like every year with the Lions, you sort of get into that position, right? Instead of us being able to talk about potential playoffs and things like that, I feel like for the majority of my life, the majority of my 32 years, we have spent more time talking about how high of a draft pick are they going to get? Are they going to be able to position themselves to be that number one pick? And you have those conversations more often than you have, hey, they have a chance to make the playoffs. And I think as you know, it just gets tiresome. And I really don't know what to do with the Lions. We'll see what they can do here next week uh, against the track meet, the Miami Dolphins, that Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Tua combo. Um, that could be ugly. That could be a very ugly game for the Lions, because that team can not only put up points, but they put up points quickly. Um, so it could be rough. It could be a rough October 30th. And might get a little bit of a trick there instead of a treat this Halloween. Um, but yeah, I it's hard for me to say, should we stay the course? Should we bring in new people? I don't know who those people we would bring in are. I really don't have any like hot takes about, hey, we need if we added this guy as a coach, he would be able to sort of solve the problems. He'd be able to take the reins and do what Dan Campbell can't. Like I said, I've been happy with Brad Holmes' moves, and definitely think he want to see what he does next off season, and hopefully comes out here and addresses the defense because it is, I think, the biggest issue with the defense is a lack of talent. See what he can do there to equip the team better in the offseason. But unfortunately, there's not a lot you can do during the season. So here we are again, posturing, questioning: do the Lions have what it takes for the first pick in the draft? And they just might. They just might. We'll have to see. Well, I just want to thank everybody for tuning in here and commenting. Really appreciate you engaging with the show. Again, you can find the Lions Grid on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Twitch. Just search for the Lions Grid, and that should bring up our different channels. Then once you're there, make sure you follow, like, subscribe, all of those great things. Really help appreciate your contributions there, and we'll catch you during the next episode. Thank you very much, and have a fantastic day.